First of all, I apologize to anybody who's been trying to watch the meeting. Arthur, are you there? Arthur, where'd you go?
I'm here.
Okay. Call to attend, call again to order the Nantucket Memorial Airport Commission of June 9, 2020. I apologize to everybody who's been, anybody or everybody who's been waiting to watch us on the YouTube channel. We've just been having myriad of technical difficulties getting this thing going. We have present, well, I'll get into that. As a preliminary matter, I'm Dan Drake, Chairman of the Nantucket Memorial Airport Commission. I have to read this thing before every meeting. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Arthur Gasparo.
Here.
Jeanette Topham.
Here.
Tony Buscarin.
Here.
And Commissioner Planzer is not present. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Noah Carberg.
Here.
Jamie Sansbury. Jamie left us. Oh, no, there she is. You're here. Please say here, Jamie.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, Dan. Tony, Frank, you keep muting me, but the only way I think that Tony is hearing is through my speaker. I think. I'm not sure how Tony is hearing the meeting or not hearing the meeting.
Your speaker, I'm hearing it loud and clear.
Are you hearing it through the phone or through Zoom?
The phone.
Okay.
Okay, so
I'm hearing feedback,
clarify.
and that is why I'm trying to mute the meeting.
I can be muted, but when Tony wants to talk, I have to unmute myself.
I see.
I'm assuming that's what it sounds like. Sorry, this is
All right.
a little new.
The reason we had a delay was because we were having problems with the phone number that Tony called.
Okay,
If he
but with
calls a different
Frank,
meeting.
excuse me, Frank, we have to get going. We're already half an hour late and we have a wall at the other end of this meeting. So we have to go. We have to get going. Are we on live now?
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you. Was all that stuff that I said already recorded, or was that
Yes,
not
it was
yet?
recorded.
Okay, thank you. We have one anticipated speaker on the agenda, Rich Laston. Are you here, Mr. Laston? You have to unmute and say yes.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. This open meeting of the Nantucket Memorial Airport Commission is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we've been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public meetings. And as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted with agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely, so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment at the end. For this meeting, the Nantucket Memorial Airport Commission is convening by video conference via the Zoom app and broadcasting on the Town of Nantucket YouTube channel. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and to take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials that have been provided to members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless I note otherwise. We are now turning to the first item on the agenda, but before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and ensure accurate meeting minutes. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. After members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment as follows. Staff will activate the chat feature on YouTube. Members of the public who have comments or questions can use this feature to communicate with the public body. Instructions are on the town's website. The chair and/or staff will do the best to address questions or comments. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. We had an amendment to the agenda, which is for the approval of an ASMP grant. Did everybody did that? The members, Mr. Gasparo?
I did.
Ms. Topham?
I did.
Mr. Buscarin?
Yes.
Thank you. So with that addition, are there any comments on the agenda? Hearing none, the agenda is approved. We have the minutes of the May 12th, 2020 meeting. Are there any comments or corrections?
Dan, if I may, going back to the agenda, I had a unforeseeable special event application I'd like to bring up during my manager's report.
That's fine. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
There's a motion to second.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Buscarin. How do you vote, Ms. Topham?
I,
Mr. Gasparo?
Aye.
Mr. Buscarin?
Aye.
The chair votes aye. Pending leases and contracts, would you take us through those, Mr. Carberg, please?
Yes, we have a number of airline leases listed as pending. This is due to schedule uncertainties and staffing difficulties at the airline in response to COVID. We are working through them, and we will continue to bring these up as they are completed. We have Republic Airways doing business as American Eagle for $20,267. This is a seasonal airline agreement for the air component. The ground handling portion for the additional ground services and rents will follow as pending. We have an operating agreement. It's the annual operating agreement for Spectacular for $1,500, a Part 135 operation through the FBO. We have an operating agreement for $1,500 for G-Jet International, doing business as Flying Zebra. They are a Flyblade affiliate operator. We have a contract for $15,977,304 for Lawrence Lynch for reconstructing Taxiway Echo. This is the base bid only. There are a number of add alts with additional value that we are not approving as of yet. We will come back for those alternates. We have a contract for on-call planning and engineering for McFarland Johnson. It's planning for both AIP and non-AIP projects. Subsequent task orders will be delivered to the Airport Commission for their approval. We have a contract amendment for Daedalus Projects Incorporated for $19,581.07 for OPM services for the security project. The original contract was $173,000 and change, but as you recall, we split into two phases to accommodate funding availability. This amendment also extends the date commensurately by 24 months to align with that second phase. We have a contract with the American Association of Airport Executives for $46,200. This is the full 3-year value of our interactive employee training system. We have a contract with Graywall, formerly known as Viochi, for $99,600. This is the full 3-year value for our software that we use for multiple purposes, process automation, Part 139 tracking, wildlife, and more. We have a contract amendment for Weston Solutions for $60,635. This request is a second amendment needed to respond to both time-critical and escalating costs associated with the airport's investigation and remediation into PFAS. I want to take some apology for not being strategic in my rush to provide the First Amendment. There were also several site conditions that necessitated, honestly, us coming back for more money. These have been difficult installs. I have included a letter from council who does advise immediate approval given the public health urgency.
Are there any questions or comments? Ms. Topham?
I have a question. Where is Lawrence Lynch getting their asphalt? Are they bringing it? Or they have a plant or what's happening?
Those discussions are ongoing. They will be barging in materials and are looking to start that very soon for stockpiling. They are negotiating along two fronts, both to rent the existing batch plant on Bunker Road and to permit and bring in a temporary asphalt batching plant, which we believe we could accommodate on what we call the Stroney lot, which is the last lot on the left of Bunker Road. Neither of those have been finalized, but it would be one or both of those options.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Gasparo, do you have any questions?
I don't. Thank you.
Mr. Buscarin?
No.
All right, I'll entertain a motion to approve the contracts and leases, which I just had up here, but I don't have any more. There are, oh, here we go. There's the one with Republic Airways, Spectacular, G-Jet International, Lawrence Lynch Corporation, McFarland Johnson, Daedalus Projects, American Association of Airport Executives, Gray Wall, and Weston Solutions. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second,
Thank you. How do you vote, Mrs. Topham?
aye.
Mr. Buscarin?
Aye.
Mr. Gasparo?
Aye.
The chair votes aye.
Excuse me, Dan.
Yes,
I don't think we ratified the warrants.
you're right. Thank you. Is there a motion to ratify the
Make that
warrants of May
motion.
13th and May 27th?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Gasparo, was that you seconding?
It was.
Thank you. How do you vote, Mr. Buscarin,
Aye.
Ms. Topham,
Aye.
Mr. Gasparo?
Aye.
The chair votes aye. Thank you. Thank you, Lily, for reminding me. Pending matters, crew quarters development.
There's been no action on the crew quarters development. For the government study committee, the ATM article, I'm sorry, I don't have the ATM article number, but the one that we assigned to give limited funding authority to the select board will not be part of the abbreviated annual town meeting. The town is looking to just keep a very slim, streamlined warrant. So we'll look to address that at the next available annual or special town meeting.
Thank you. Now we have a presentation on the EIR study from Rich Laston from McFarland Johnson. I don't know, Noah, whether you want to say anything more in introduction.
Yes, very briefly, Rich is our project manager at McFarland Johnson. He is overseeing the 5-year environmental permitting. We had the opportunity to review some of these projects with the vice chair, and it was honestly such a good conversation. We thought we should bring it to the whole board.
Go ahead, Mr. Laston. You have the floor.
I'm going to share my screen.
Yes, you may.
Right. Screen 1. All right, where is it? Screen 2. Come on. Okay. Does everybody see my screen?
Is this the one with the agenda?
Nope. All
Where
right,
did that
let's,
come
all right, let's, all right, we'll move this one back. Hold on. We're, okay. Okay, now does everybody see the
Yes.
pictures? All right. So good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. My name is Rich Lasden from McFarland Johnson. And as Noah indicated, I'd like to go over the projects that are listed in the EA study that we're doing. So the first drawing is an overall drawing of all the projects and some estimates of the impacts associated with each of those projects as far as habitat and grass and pervious and impervious surface. So the first project on the EA study is the reconstruction of runway 624. So that is a project that involves reconstruction of the runway and also regrading of the grass along both sides of the runway. The FAA has profile criteria for the runway that it has to meet. And it also has side slope criteria in the grass. So this drawing here, if everybody can see my cursor, shows the limits of disturbance out in the grass. Depending on where we are on the runway, we have to get closer to the runway or further away as we grade the grass so that there's proper drainage on the runway. The green here indicates pavement that's going to be removed. The FAA has changed the geometry standards of taxiways as they intersect runways. So here we actually have a little piece of pavement that we're going to remove as we reconstruct the runway. The second picture.
Excuse me, just for clarification, Mr. Lassen, for clarification, all
Yes,
of these projects are in the AIP, right?
Yes, they are. So the idea of the EA is to do the EA for the next 5 years worth of projects. The process is you do the environmental first, and then you follow up with necessary permits if there are any, and then you follow that up with construction. So the first year or the project we're doing now is the environmental effort or the permitting. Excuse me, the environmental effort. The next year, depending on the project, would be permitting, and then after that would be construction. This here is the middle portion of the runway. You can see here where my cursor is, it shows quite a bit of work out in the grass. There was a profile concern with the runway. The runway had to be raised up in grade to meet criteria. So there's more work required out in the grass as we go down to meet the existing condition. This also shows the relocation of taxiways. The green taxiway is the existing taxiways. The FAA now has a policy that they want to discourage planes having the ability to travel directly from a ramp to a runway without having to make a turn. So by moving the taxiway to the yellow, the pilot has to physically make a turn and turn back before he can get to the runway. That's a safety procedure that the FAA is instituting nationwide. This shows the other end of the runway. This end of the runway, if the commission might remember, certainly the airport management remembers, there was a concern early on about the elevation. The FAA had a criteria at one time that the runway could not be lower than the taxiway. Through many discussions with the FAA, they allowed that to remain here at the airport. So the runway is physically lower than the taxiway. However, because of that, the grass grades directly down from the taxiway to the runway. In other words, when it rains, the water runs off the taxiway onto the runway. So in order to correct that, we had to regrade the grass and cut a ditch line through the grass. So that is why there's so much work in the grass on this side, and on this side also. There has to be the pavement has to be able to drain away from the runway out to a ditch where it's collected into a drainage system and then moved away. So that's why this is also a significant amount of work in the grass here.
Excuse me,
Yes, sir.
before you get off that slide, your study did not include the possibility of extending the runway to the northeast, did it?
No, there is ultimately there will be a larger study that has to do with dealing with the erosion on the 6 end and how that impacts the runway, either a shift or something. We didn't get into an extension, but we have talked preliminarily about a need to shift the runway long-term.
Well, yeah, you mean just move it,
Shift the whole runway, yes. Pick it up and shift it to the 2-4 end.
right? Thank you.
Yes. So this is taxiway Charlie, which is also serves as runway 1230. There's been a push now to permanently decommission the runway and convert it permanently into a taxiway. This project, the first step of this project is simple as far as construction. It's repainting it and removing runway numbers. There's also an administrative function on converting it from a runway. We have to remove it from the airspace charts. We have to remove it from your Part 139. We have to remove it from a bunch of other FAA administrative documents to remove it from being a runway. So that's what this project is. This project here is replacement of electrical cables from the new electrical vault back to the airfield. Most of it will be in pavement, but some of it will have to come across the grass here. So there'll be some temporary impacts to the grass and to habitat, depending on where we go. This is habitat, this is not habitat, but there was some impacts to the grass that would have to be discussed and reviewed as part of the environmental project. Early on, the tower had requested the ability to provide a different exit point off the runway for planes that arrive on 624. The more time it takes for a plane to roll out and exit, the less time is available for follow-up planes to land. So there's two options on exiting a runway. There's what's called the high-speed exit. That allows planes to get off sooner because they're going faster, hence it's an angled taxiway. And so this is one option. The second option is a 90-degree turn. And we are studying both options from an environmental point of view. Ultimately, the commission and the airport management will decide which option makes sense as far as exiting the runway. So this is just two options of the same need. This is the expansion of the south apron. As you can see, we've shown planes on here, one commercial service plane and a series of corporate or private jets. And this is just for new capacity. A lot of this capacity temporarily during your busy season parks on the closed crosswind runway. So this is, the FAA considers this a safety problem. And it's not a capacity enhancement so much as it allows us to free up the runway and park the planes here on the apron. There's two options here. There's this option, and then there's a second option. They're essentially the same thing. One of them pushes it a little bit closer to the homeowners and retains more protected habitat. The second one stays further away and allows more distance from the homeowners. Again, we're looking at two options. They'll be presented to the commission and the airport for a final decision before we get into design, along with ultimately how the layout might want to look. This is just a layout that was discussed early on what was the needs for this apron expansion. This is shifting taxiway Gulf. Currently, the separation or the distance between the center line of taxiway Gulf and the center line of taxiway Echo doesn't meet FAA criteria for simultaneous movements of aircraft. So in order to do that, the runway has to be shifted. So this is simply, we're going to remove the green and build the yellow and then move the center line. It's a little more complicated than that, but we're essentially going to shift the pavement so that we can have the proper separation. This is the perimeter road on the 6 end. This is the beach where the erosion problem is concurring today. The green is the current perimeter road, and the brown is the proposed perimeter road. The reason it looks like this shape is the main problem with the beach erosion is sort of in this area right here. So there is a quicker need to move the road in this area than here. This area is also at the end of the runway and is controlled by a series of FAA obligated land for nav aids, for safety areas, for critical areas, for nav aids and other things. So moving this piece of the road will require a bigger FAA study, whereas this is really just an environmental study. We can just move this as we need to, as long as we meet environmental criteria. The rest of it, as I said, will require FAA decisions. This is the crew quarters. There are two options for the crew quarters. Right now, we are looking at 4 units. This is 2 units side by side. And then the state actually asked us to look at 1 unit with 1 location with 4 units all side by side. So we are looking at 2 options for crew quarters to start. I think some of you have seen there was a study, a long-time study that showed this whole area being developed for crew quarters. Right now, this is what's being looked at after discussions with airport management. This is the ground service equipment building. It's a cold storage building that to store your ground service equipment in the off season. There are 2 options, the first option and the second option. And that was just 2 options to show those buildings. This is the expansion of the boatyard. There's been some discussion. Apparently there's a question out on the street or indication from the existing boatyard that he'd like to expand the property. There's a sliver of land between the AOA fence and the ball field. And so we've looked at expanding the boatyard into that parcel of land. And that is all of the options. Certainly we can discuss any particular option that any of the commission members have questions on. You're on mute, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any questions, Ms. Topham? At this point?
You're on mute too.
Mr. Buscarin, do you have any questions? Mr. Buscarin, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Do you have any questions?
No, I don't.
Thank you. Mr. Gasparo?
Thank you. I do have a couple of points. First, I would say I very much appreciate this presentation. I think it's the most comprehensive outline of all the projects that we've seen since really some of the master planning and capital improvement projects in the airport layout plan. I think there's a great amount of good work that's gone in here. The perimeter road, I wanted to just mention as something that I've raised for some years, concerned with the erosion. And while I do look forward to seeing sort of the southerly most portion of the road relocated to the north, I think that our consultants have done a great job with addressing what, for lack of a better term, buying us some time. And then I think the commission does have to remain aware that that piece that still dips to the south in the runway safety areas is certainly something that we're going to have to, keep on our radar screens. You've got an annual rate of erosion there that exceeds 10 feet a year. So we don't have all that long until where that bend is made becomes the next critical point. But I do support what's shown and appreciate it. And then the big project that I think the commission needs to spend or should spend a little time on is the apron expansion. I think it's the biggest project that the airport has seen for an expansion probably since the terminal. I think it's going to come as a bit of a surprise to the public. And we're at a stage of environmental permitting that I think we have to really be sure that we've looked at and addressed all of the potential impacts and mitigation strategies. And in discussions that I've had both through the environmental subcommittee as well as with staff and the consultants, there is limitations as to what portions of mitigation will be eligible for funding. And unfortunately, as well as that includes both studies and mitigation for the project. And I think that we can't just shy away because of lack of funding from looking at this project as how it may impact the nearby neighborhood and what we might do about it. What's in front of you has been well developed and includes you may recall from the airport layout plan discussions of a noise barrier wall. Instead, what's being shown here, that crosshatched area to the north, or I should say above the apron, is would be an earthen berm. Ideally, the soil that's removed to topsoil layers for the construction of the ramp area could be stockpiled there. Now, part of the concern that I have right now is the black line labeled LOD for limited disturbance is essentially the limit of permitting study, and we're not looking at that area as part of this study. And what I asked NOAA for, and I hope that you would agree, would be an estimate of cost if that part isn't covered under the reimbursable funding. I think the economy of scale would still be in our benefit to know how much it would cost the airport to undertake the environmental work for that area. Essentially, what's going to happen is later, when it comes time to look at mitigation strategies, and they say, well, you haven't studied this area, so we can't do it. And one part of the project goes forward and there's no actual mitigation, then you say, well, it's too late, or we can't do this mitigation. The noise study that you may recall that had been done last summer, certainly shows as a result of, this project that there will be increases in noise. We're doing environmental permitting. However, none of it takes into account noise, lighting, or emissions. And to me, that just seems wrong. I understand it may not be eligible for funding, but all three of those are environmental impacts that are going to occur as a result of this project. The focus seems to be much more because it's mapped for rare and endangered species, that we're looking at botanical type surveys. And I understand that all needs to be done in the permit path in order to move this project forward. But I think for something like this, essentially a doubling of the size of the jet parking area, to not look at those other three factors of noise, emissions, and lighting impacts would be irresponsible for us as commissioners, as representatives for the community, and how this project might impact Nantucket. So I guess that's just my thoughts on it, and I certainly hope for the support of the commission in expanding the environmental studies related to this aspect of the project. Thank you.
I found my unmute button.
Okay, go ahead,
I-
stop them.
I agree with a lot of what
I have a
Mr.
comment.
Maspero has said, and this actually was a presentation that I understood and could see. So I thought that for me was a plus. And you did indicate that you talked to the tower people also, correct?
Yes.
we've had conversations with the tower. We had a separate meeting with the tower to talk about 1230. We've had other discussions with them in the past, yes.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Gasparo and Mr. Carberg talked about this a little bit this morning. There are several issues on here. I think another one is the whole issue of the impact of the space over behind Nantucket Marine off Sun Island Road and adjacent to the Delta Fields, which needs to be vetted. And this whole issue with respect to the mitigation of impact from the ramp needs very much to stay on the radar. I'm not going to say I'm totally in agreement with everything Mr. Gasparo says, but I think his point is a valid one in the sense that we need to make a conscious decision on each of these things as to whether or not it is something that should be pursued and or responded to in one way or another. So I have suggested that he, as chair of the environmental subcommittee, he call a meeting relatively soon to start looking at some of these issues and come back, if he can, at the July meeting with the subcommittee's thoughts on the plans. Mr. Viscarin, did you have a comment?
I do. This meeting with Arthur on the environmental impact of expanding the jet ramp south, and for that and for that reason and for other reasons, I do not favor expanding the jet ramp south. Majorly for the reason that it is used sparingly during the summer and completely useless the rest of the year. It's an enormous amount of money, which yields maybe a little bit of benefit to the airport over a long period of time. So my initial impression is that we should not pursue that at all.
Well, I think this probably is a debate we need to continue. And given the fact that we are constrained for time today, Mr. Gasparo, are you agreeable to going forward with an environmental subcommittee meeting?
Yeah, as soon as staff's able to coordinate, I'm, fully available.
All right. Anybody else have anything they want to add?
I can meet with Arthur anytime. I think I'm on the environmental subcommittee as well.
Right. All right. Very good. Thank you all. Mr. Laston, thank you very much. It is a great, other than the fact that the type's too small to read on the screen. I think it's a excellent presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and through you, Mr. Gasparo, I'd be more than happy to meet with you and your committee at the airport if that helps.
Right.
I think we could probably do Zoom and, make it easier on you and keep expenses if you want to coordinate with Noah, and I do appreciate that.
Very good.
All right. Thank you all very much. Moving on, the next item on the agenda is the Nantucket Regal Group Crosswinds Restaurant discussion regarding outside dining provisions.
Yes, the intent of this item is to seek out the commission's endorsement for staff to engage Crosswinds at Crosswinds' request to explore and allow outside dining in both the grassy area next to the restaurant and in the gazebo. This is obviously in response to allow them to maintain service capacity, looking at the incoming COVID requirements.
It occurred to me, Mr. Carberg, that Crosswinds is looking for an answer that they can move forward on quite quickly.
That's correct.
And so what is the appropriate action for this commission to take in regard to this discussion? Because
the item I'm looking for is an endorsement of the concept, which would allow staff to work with Crosswinds and the appropriate town permitting agencies. What I would like to avoid is having to wait until July to give them the go-ahead to move forward.
right, that's my point precisely, and that maybe we need, if the commission is agreeable, we need a formal motion to allow airport management and discretion, in its discretion, to reach an agreement with Crosswinds about the availability of outdoor space. But it has to have some limitation on it. maybe through this season or something of that sort. I'd appreciate any other views. Mr. Gasparo, do you have a point?
I support that, though I would also like to see perhaps the motion could be, or we could have discussion that subject to chair consent as well. So the commission's, through staff, but that they also have to, run the final agreement by you, I think would be a good check and balance.
Would you like to make a motion?
Yes, I would make a motion to that effect, which is to authorize staff to work with the Regal Group to establish outdoor seating and other service arrangements for licensing and operations subject to approval by the chair.
But only for this season, right? Would you include that?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I'll amend the motion to say for through the end of this calendar year. Why don't we say that?
And I'll second that motion.
Is there any further discussion? Mr. Buscarin, do you have any thoughts?
We ought to allow them to expand in any reasonable place. I'm very sympathetic to restaurants' restrictions, and I think if they can find any space available outside that's reasonable, we ought to authorize it. So I would support that motion and support a very expansive ability for the restaurant to expand outside as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Ms. Topham, do you have any further comments?
No, sir.
Mr. Gasparo?
No, thank you.
There's a motion on the floor. How do you vote, Ms. Topham?
Aye.
Mr. Buscarin?
Aye.
Mr. Gasparo?
Aye.
The chair votes aye. So, good luck working with them.
Thank you for that.
The next is approval of a MassDOT ASMP grant award to purchase a dump truck for $46,869.20. And this is 80% of the cost of the dump truck or 100%?
This is 80% of the cost of the dump truck.
I would make a motion to accept the grant for the dump truck.
Thank you, Mr. Gasparo. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Topham. Any further discussion? How do you vote, Ms. Topham?
Aye.
Mr. Buscarin?
Aye.
The chair, Mr. Gasparo, I'm sorry, and the chair votes aye. All right. General fund repayment proposal and discussion of in-kind services. The amount of the payment will be $228,010.65, which is net of services, in-kind services that the airport has provided back to the town of Nantucket. This is under the repayment schedule that we have to, we are committed to through 2027 or some such time for advances to the airport from the town back in 2011 and 12. If there's no discussion, I'll entertain a motion to authorize the repayment.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Gasparo. Just another point I think it's worth making, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Sansbury, but this has all been factored into the projected financial results for the airport. There's something wrong with your mic. But Ms. Sansbury just gave a thumbs up. There's something funny there. Anyway, Mr. Carberg, do you want to carry on with the CARES Act grant?
Yeah, so financial updates for the CARES Act. We submitted our application to the FAA for the $6.2 million to which we were entitled. We've since submitted payroll reimbursement requests for April and May, which is 4 total payrolls. We do not anticipate submitting any further reimbursement requests for June. The amount of those 4 payrolls is $560,000. And we did list that with the other transfer sources on the budget summary. That's where you'll see that item Our intent for the CARES Act moving forward into fiscal year 21 is to submit reimbursement for 70% of payrolls for a total of 3.4 million in fiscal year 21, which would leave a little over 2 million available for fiscal year 22 and beyond. The other CARES Act related item for the annual town meeting enterprise fund budget article. Our article will only show 1.4 million for employee expenses. The warrant does not include the CARES Act funding assigned to payroll. So it is a mechanism in which we have to show the funding. The actual amounts would be 4.9 million, but if you back out the 70%, that's how you arrive at the 1.4. So we want to explain the reason why you might observe a discrepancy in what we're showing you for the budget versus what's shown in the annual town meeting amendments. If there are no questions.
Questions? Go ahead, Mr. Carberg.
For the financial impacts discussion, looking at the final result of our fiscal year 20 budget review in response to COVID, we've revised our revenue impacts to show a reduction of $110,000 in revenue, which is driven by a reduction of $200,000 from fuel revolver flow over to operating. Our operating revenue is actually still forecast to be 97,000 over budget, or more than we did budget. The difference, of course, being reduction of 110,000. Our expense impact as revised, we did save $242,000 by not backfilling open positions with one exception, which I'll bring up soon. However, as part of this exercise, we really did identify that most of our expenses, they really are largely fixed, and many of them have increased due to COVID response for legal fees, terminal deferral, or rent deferral, and for PFAS efforts. We're coming in at 183,000 over budget with total expenses. $59,000 less than anticipated. So this gap is roughly $500,000 for fiscal year 20. We did go ahead and we backed out a retained earning transfer of $400,000 that did not happen because of the delay in town meeting. We thought it was appropriate to go forward with the worst case scenario, so we don't want to rely on that funding. And when we continue with our $400,000 PFC transfer and our $560,000 CARES Act application, we end up with a surplus of approximately $500,000. The caution with that surplus, that does not take into account the recently passed $60,000 amendment with Weston that happened post Jamie's workup, and she's done marvelous work. We didn't want to ask her to do any more. It does reflect the repayment to the general fund for the town. And after pay down of capital projects from retained earnings to close out fiscal year 20, this leaves a balance in retained earnings of $1.7 million.
Any questions at this point? Mr. Buscarin, do you have any questions?
No.
Everybody else is shaking their heads. Okay, thank you. You want to continue with fiscal year 21?
Yes, so we have also revised our budget for fiscal year 21 accordingly. A quick note on methodology. We broke out functional sections of the airport operation, and we implied an increasing rate of monthly recovery. For example, we anticipated a 90% reduction in commercial passengers early, a 50% reduction in the FBO, etc. The result is a decrease in forecast revenue from 9.3 million down to 5.5 million, which is significant. On the expense side, as I mentioned earlier, we found some reductions, but only about $319,000 worth. Many of those costs are fixed. The result is nearly a $4 million shortfall, which we are able to patch, and this gets patched by a $3.4 million reliance on our available CARES Act funding. Also of note is we did not transfer retained earnings to the stabilization fund in fiscal year 20. Jamie will be working on that, and she'll identify an amount that will add to the fiscal year 21 budget. It's likely to be that original $100,000 plus another sum that Jamie will identify. Quote again, there's no reliance on retained earnings looking at fiscal year 21. Another major item to note is we've lowered our fuel revolver cap to $2 million. We anticipate about $458,000 will overflow to our operating revenue from that fuel revolver cap. In discussion of our PFAS investigation and remediation responsibilities, we have already begun significant work this year without the benefit of our $250,000 transfer from retained earnings that was reliant on ATM occurring. So we will have this money available in fiscal year 21. Our goal is also to transfer in another $750,000 over several years to manage the project cash flow. Are there any questions?
Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the revised fiscal year 21 budget?
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Biscarin. Any further discussion? How do you vote, Ms. Topham?
Aye.
Mr. Biscarin?
Aye.
Mr. Gasparo? Chair votes aye. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm here to speak about it, but Jamie really deserves all the credit for doing a great job with the budget under less than ideal work circumstances.
Thank you.
Very much, Jamie. We appreciate it.
Manager's report, Mr. Carberg. I know we have 9 minutes left in our allotted time by NCTV. So please make this a Reader's Digest version if you can.
Sorry to interrupt, but I believe we have till 4:30, not 3:30.
Oh, good. Okay, great. I thought it was
Sorry.
3:30.
Also, Noah, you can also go quick though. I didn't.
You can still be brief, Noah.
I'll be brief. Modification that I have to my prepared notes. I have just received a special event permit application. It's being put forth on behalf of a charitable group named Nantucket Neighbor. Our policy had identified that we would no longer consider special event permit applications unless they were from tenants. In this case, the group is working with Crosswinds to provide meals to unemployed and underemployed individuals. So I would like your consent to deviate from the policy.
What is the nature of the event?
The nature of the event is Crosswinds will be providing, I believe I read, on the order of 25 to 50 meals on Mondays and Thursdays. And it would be to work with Crosswinds to identify a pickup system, whether that's individually or through one of the volunteers who's working to staff, a way to shuttle these from the takeout window at Crosswinds to a car. So I don't anticipate it being a big impact on the operation. I think it's a good use of our time to try to accommodate.
Is there a duration attached to this?
I do not believe I saw a current, there's no duration attached to it, Dan.
Crosswinds is already doing a pickup, so this is just an add-on for the neighbors. Is this what I'm hearing?
It's an add-on, but I believe, Ms. Topham, it would be mediated by the charitable organization with some volunteers to facilitate that work.
Is Nantucket Neighbors a registered charity? Do you know?
I have not had time to assess that.
I'm not sure. I guess I'd rather say, I'm not sure an event permit is needed for this if it's just additional business at Crosswinds pickup window.
I agree.
Mr. Gasparo, how do you feel?
Yeah, I'm not sure that it fits a category that would rise to special event.
Mr. Buscarin?
I agree.
There's your answer, Mr. Carberg.
Excellent. Thank you. For project updates, the runway 1533 and 1230 pavement marking project. This is a Jacobs managed project with Highway Safety Systems. $250,000 project at 80% DOT participation. We held a pre-con. Work will start tomorrow morning for a duration of 4 to 5 days if the weather holds. This is to remove and replace the markings on runway 1533 and 1230 and the associated crack sealing. We have a separate crack sealing and seal coating project that overlaps. This is a 100% state project, which State DOT Aeronautics Division has worked tirelessly to make sure we were included on. The first phase, which is ramp crack sealing, is completed. The vendor will return on the 21st for seal coating. Our summer arrival secure hold room tent, our secure hold room tent has been raised and is operational. It looks great. We need to give accolades to staff who took it all upon themselves to do this year. It had previously been done by a third-party contractor. Security phase 1 project is 95% complete. A few touch-up items and doors are outstanding. We're planning a virtual closeout meeting next week. Security phase 2 starts in the fall pending approval at ATM. Taxiway Echo, we reviewed. We are looking to start that this fall with approval of the contract. I know that the vendor will start barging material over in preparation for that work. The airport layout plan update for runway 1230, which will show the decommissioning of the runway to remain as a full-time taxiway, is at the FAA for signature. We're beginning a similar planning effort with the FAA for design of the stub taxiways that Mr. Lasden showed in his presentation. This concept and general scope is at the FAA now for their review. It will be an AIP eligible project. Let's see, we heard from Rich on the EAEIR. We heard on the AMP projects. The Thompson House pellet system has been installed and tested. It came back at 0.5 parts per trillion, which is at the limit of detection. We did perform a follow-up sample as we do want to ensure it is a zero detect. And that sample result is expected imminently. I've just put I've directed to have the HDC paperwork related to the car chargers in the packet. It's just there for your review. No action is required. And I have no update on the Great Harbor Yacht Club pilings, stormwater inventory, and PFC application number 2, but those do continue to move forward. Any questions before I move to RFP and bid updates? Hearing none. The on-call engineering, we've sent notice of awards to McFarland Johnson and Stantec. They both reviewed very well and will maintain 2 engineers. The Fuel Farm Owners Project Manager Services RFQ for the Fuel Farm is available to the public on the 11th of this month with a deadline for proposal receipt on the 26th. The related IFB for the Fuel Farm rehab is set to go out to bid next month. And our invitation for bids for the automatic door service and maintenance is under review with 1 bid having been received. For operations, we've been tracking our financial results and recovery. Daffodil sales were down 82%. Wine Festival was down 75%. And Memorial Day was down 66%. So it's not great news, but it is improving news as we move through the season. Internally, we're holding projections that show a slow and continued recovery, stabilizing at 40 to 60% by July 4th to stick with us through the rest of the summer. Caution not to put too much stock in that, but we are tracking our indicators. We're working to establish a new billing rate for reduction of the town repayments. We have actual large chunks of pavement. It's possible that another town entity may pay to have those ground, and we would set a recovery rate appropriately, less than the millings, but would still come off of our repayments agreement with the town. I'll continue to advise on that. We're working with the town as we co-manage the Nobadir Bluff access, where we traditionally license some beach vendors, the surf school and Nantucket bar, they're working through their beach COVID requirements from the state. And we're working also with our tenants just to keep everyone informed on ensuring everyone's operation is compliant and operational. The FAA certification inspection is still postponed, no word on scheduling that. ATC hours are still in their reduced format. We've had no incidents and no word on resumption of the traditional hours. We continue to work on our return to work and occupation plans. You'll see that we'll put some temporary vinyl decals down in the terminal to inform on spacing and reflect the state mask policy. We have some employees who continue to work a modified work schedule. For PFAS, we have had conversations with the FAA on an appropriate scope of soils work related to taxiway echo construction. The FAA has indicated that investigation work associated with that should be AIP eligible, and we're waiting for the FAA to advise on how they would like to see that handled. But that is good news for our financial burden. Summer air service, our update is unchanged from the last meeting, except that JetBlue has pulled their LaGuardia and White Plains flights. They're now anticipating 2 to 3 daily flights. But again, they acknowledge this may change. It's an evolving situation. If demand increases, they certainly expect to put more flights on accordingly. So Nantucket Allies has ended their freight operations. If you recall, they were subleasing Hangar 8 from our tenant on a month-to-month basis. The tenant exercised his option to end the month-to-month lease, so that hangar will revert to us. With the freight operation ceasing, Allies is still maintaining their 135 operation, but the freight operation has closed. In light of that, the airport has initiated counter freight resumption discussions with Cape Air. Also, we think the current volume of passengers through the terminal is appropriate to look at this operation again. We've had one meeting. I characterize it as productive. Our goal is to have a term sheet for inclusion in the packet for their review in July. Any questions before I move on to statistics? Okay, so operations were down 60% for April, but are still up 13% on the year. I'll be blunt, we don't expect that to last. The Southwest operations were down 185% for April, 832 to 292. Enplanements were down 93% and are now only slightly positive for the year. As we're getting into our commercial season with reduced capacity, those numbers will drop quickly. For Cape Air Boston, enplanements fell 95% to about a 12% load factor. There's a 97% reduction in enplanements for New Bedford. I'm sorry, I don't have the statistics package in front of me, but there's a bit of an aberration among the two Hyannis Air Service business providers, Nantucket Air and Cape Air. But if you move to the market summary slide, see that the total market was down 76% between them. Vineyard similarly was down 89%, and all of these numbers have been reflected in the broader nationwide industry trends. Jet A gallons sold were down 76% for April, and it's up only slightly on the year. They were only down 58% for May. 100 low lead was down 37% for April and down 4% on the year. It's also down 76% for May. Freight was down 34% for April. I'm reviewing this number now. I'd like to get a little bit of a better explanation. It's not necessarily explained by the Allies closure. It would initially appear to me that the delay in business resumption had a greater effect than what's known as the Amazon effect of residents purchasing delivery items through Amazon. We have no noise complaints. We actually have not had a complaint received since January. That's the statistics report. I have 2 personnel items, if there are no questions on statistics. We are interviewing for a maintenance technician level 2. We hope that we can have more information out for this week by the end of this week, and we will advise accordingly. And then on a seasonal update, we are up to 8 or 9 seasonal staff, or roughly half the components of what we held last year. And that's my report. I'm sorry, Dan, you're muted.
Any questions of Mr. Carberg?
No.
All right. Are there commissioners' comments? Ms. Topham, Mr. Gasparo?
Yeah, I just would like to briefly expand on, since we're going to have an environmental subcommittee, the other topic that I would like to have on the agenda for that would be related to the PFAS situation, and then to discuss that and bring it back and have it on the agenda for the whole commission for the next meeting in terms of public outreach implications, where we're at. As you can see from the contracts, the cost of the installation of those remedial systems were over twice what had been expected. And I think further discussion and understanding of both financial and environmental and health impacts is, the commission, I think, needs to spend a little more time on that.
Sounds good. Thank you. Ms. Topham, do you have any? Mr. Buscarin, do you have any comments?
I do not.
Just a couple of things. One is that normally at this meeting, we'd be discussing salary increases for the non-union staff. Obviously, under the circumstances, when it's not clear what the position is going to be, there's no negotiations have been going on with the union staff. And they will resume, I gather, fairly soon. But I think that the indications are probably that I can't say there won't be any raises, but if there is a raise for the unions for the coming year, fiscal year, we'll certainly get on that. But this is particularly difficult for me because I understand how hard the staff at the airport has been working under very difficult conditions the last few months, not only for the people who are present on this call, but the entire staff. And they've been doing a lot to try to save money and to do their work efficiently. And I just, for my own part, would like to express my appreciation and thanks to everybody on the staff for their wonderful work in this very difficult time. And hopefully we'll continue to say that, but it's certainly been true up to now. Is there any public comment? Have you been following the YouTube, the chat, Mr. Gasparo?
I have, and I did not see any comments. There's
Okay.
4 viewers.
Thank you. All right, I will entertain a motion to go into executive session under General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, to review the minutes of the last meeting on May 28th. No, not May 28th. I'm sorry, May 12th. To review them and consider them for possible release, and for all the other minutes enumerated for possible release. Under clause 3, to discuss strategy with respect to the litigation. I'm sorry, that's a blurry copy. To discuss strategy with respect to the litigation regarding the Gatto claim, where the chair has determined an open session may have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the Airport Commission. Under clause 3, to discuss strategy with respect to the litigation regarding Walsh, where the chair has determined that an open session may have detrimental effect on the litigating position of the Airport Commission. And under clause 3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining, where the chair has determined an open session may have detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the Airport Commission. Is there such a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Ms. Topham. Is there a second?
Second.
How do you vote, Ms. Topham?
Aye.
Mr. Buscarin? Oh,
Aye.
by the way, I'm going to amend the motion to say not to return to public session, if that's all right. How do you vote, Ms. Topham?
Aye.
Mr. Gasparo?
Aye.
Mr. Buscarin?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. So it's unanimous. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Mr. Laston.
Thank you.
And thank you, Frank, for all the help.
Okay, you are